The first time I realized someone was inside my house, he wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He was calmly calling my name, like a friend standing at the bottom of the stairs. I was 16 years old. I don't even remember what month it was anymore, just that it was summer. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone for 2 days. Back then, that felt like freedom. No rules, no schedules, no one telling me to go to bed or turn the volume down. I spent almost the entire time upstairs in my room, bouncing between YouTube, gaming, and raiding the kitchen for snacks. Headphones on, door closed, lost in my own little world. That night felt no different. At some point, while I was deep into a game, I started hearing voices. At first, I assumed a video had started playing in the background. It happens all the time. Autoplay, ads, random tabs. But when I alt-tabbed out and checked YouTube, everything was paused. So I pulled one ear cup off. The voices were still there. They were faint, muffled, almost drowned out by the sound of rain tapping against the windows. It sounded like someone talking outside, close to the house, maybe near the wall. I couldn't make out any words. Just the rhythm of speech. It sounded like one voice, not multiple people. By the time I stood up and walked over to my window to listen more closely, the voice stopped. Silence. I felt a small spike of unease. Someone walking that close to the house around 8 at night felt strange, especially with it raining. I went downstairs and checked a few of the windows, scanning the yard and the street. Nothing. No figures. No movement. No cars lingering. I shrugged it off, grabbed a bag of chips from the kitchen, and went back upstairs. An hour passed fast. I was locked into another match, headphones back on, adrenaline pumping. Then I heard a voice again. This time it cut through my headset. Not louder, just clearer, sharper, like it was closer. I ripped my headphones off immediately. The house creaked softly as it always did. Rain still fell outside. I stood there holding my breath, waiting. 15 seconds passed. Then the voice spoke again. Luke. My stomach dropped. My full name is Lucas, but everyone calls me Luke. Friends, teammates, family, not strangers. I didn't recognize the voice at all. Worse, the sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from below me, inside the house. I slowly set my headset down on the desk. My hands felt numb as I stepped toward my bedroom door. I twisted the knob as carefully as possible, trying not to let it creak. Just as the door cracked open, the voice called again. Not shouting, not aggressive. Soft, calm, almost friendly. Luke. Like someone calling you from another room to ask a simple question. That tone made everything so much worse. The voice was rough and gravelly, like a man in his 50s who'd smoked his entire life. The sound echoed faintly up the stairwell, and I knew with sick certainty that he was standing near the bottom of the stairs, inside my house. I froze. I didn't close the door. I was terrified of making any noise. Instead, I backed away slowly and moved toward the window at the back of my room. I pushed it open wider and carefully climbed out onto the overhang of the front porch roof. It wasn't a real roof, more like a narrow sloped ledge about 3 or 4 feet wide, wet from the rain, slippery, dangerous. But it was better than hiding inside a room where someone was actively searching for me. That's when I realized my mistake. My phone was still on my desk. I stared at it through the window, panic tightening my chest. I considered climbing back inside for just 2 seconds, grabbing it and jumping back out. Then I saw movement in the hallway. A shadow slid across the doorway of my room. I ducked out of sight immediately. My heart felt like it was going to rip through my ribs. A few seconds later, I heard light shuffling inside my room. Drawers, footsteps, the subtle sounds of someone looking around. Then his voice again. Luke. The same soft tone. I carefully leaned just enough to see the wall inside my room. His shadow moved across it, hovering near my desk. Probably noticing my game still running, realizing I couldn't be far. Every instinct in my body screamed that I was about to be found. I crawled farther along the ledge, toward the far edge. Below me was a small bush and a patch of grass. The drop looked like maybe 8 to 10 feet. Not safe, but survivable. I lowered myself off the edge, dangled for a second, then let go. I hit the ground hard, my legs buckling beneath me as pain shot through my knees and shins. I barely had time to react before I forced myself upright and started running. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were made of rubber. Rain soaked through my shirt almost immediately, cold and heavy against my skin, but I barely noticed it. All I could think about was putting as much distance between myself and that house as possible. I sprinted straight toward the nearest neighbor's place and started pounding on their front door. Nothing. No lights turned on. No movement inside. I ran to the next house and did the same, slamming my fists against the door, shouting for help, my voice cracking from panic and exhaustion. Still nothing. In that moment, it hit me how helpless I really was. It was late. It was raining. Most people were asleep. From the outside, I probably looked like some random kid losing his mind on their porch. I kept moving from house to house, knocking and yelling, my adrenaline barely keeping me upright. Eventually, one of the houses finally responded, not by opening the door, but by calling the police. A few minutes later, red and blue lights washed across the wet street, cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. I ran toward the cruiser the moment it stopped. I must have looked insane, soaked, shaking, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. I tried explaining everything at once. The voice, the name, the shadow, the escape through the window. The officer listened carefully, his expression shifting from skeptical to concerned as the details added up. We drove back to my house together. The place looked normal from the outside. Quiet, dark, peaceful, like nothing had ever happened inside it. But when the officer checked my bedroom window, it was fully open. The ledge I'd climbed onto was wet with fresh footprints. The man had been out there. After I jumped, he had followed me onto the ledge. My stomach twisted when I realized how close I'd been to crossing paths with him again, face to face, trapped on that narrow strip of roof with nowhere to run. Inside the house, there were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks, no obvious damage. Whoever he was, he had either found a way inside quietly or already had access. The man was gone, completely vanished. In the following days, my legs swelled badly from the fall. Walking hurt for almost a week, but nothing was broken. No lasting injuries, just deep bruises and a constant reminder of how close I'd come to something much worse. The police never found him. No neighbors reported seeing anyone strange. No security cameras caught anything useful. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Just a voice calling my name in the dark. Sometimes I still think about how close I came to turning around and looking at him. How one more second of hesitation might have changed everything. How easily curiosity could have gotten me killed. I don't know who he was. I don't know how he knew my name. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't jumped. But I know one thing for sure. If I had stayed in that room, I wouldn't be telling this story today. Story 2. I didn't realize how carefully someone had been controlling the building, until the moment I felt the blow to the back of my head, and everything went black. Security is supposed to make you feel safe. Cameras, locked doors, alarms, protocols. That night taught me how meaningless all of that can be when the person on the other side already knows exactly how everything works. I still work that job, mostly because I haven't been able to find anything better yet. But I won't stay there much longer. Not after what happened. I'm a night security guard for a small office complex in town. It's part of a large business park in one of the wealthiest areas of the city. Quiet streets, manicured landscaping, high-end companies tucked behind clean glass and polished concrete. On paper, it should have been one of the safest places you could work. Who would risk breaking into an office park like that? Cameras everywhere, security patrols, alarm systems, motion sensors. At least, that's what I believed when I took the job. My shift starts at 10 p.m., Every night I do an initial walkthrough to activate the detection systems, lock down the entrances, and confirm everything's secure. After that, I settle into the security office, which is basically a glorified closet with no windows and barely enough space for a desk and a chair. I hate sitting still. The monitors get boring fast, and the silence starts messing with your head. So even though I'm technically only supposed to patrol once an hour, I usually walk the building more often just to stay awake. That night, though, it was raining hard. Not a light drizzle. Heavy, steady rain that soaked everything and blurred visibility outside. When it rains like that, the outdoor camera lenses fog up badly, which makes them nearly useless. So instead of walking the perimeter, I stayed inside and did hallway patrols. About 30 minutes into my shift, one of the monitors pinged an alert. Motion detected. Front camera. I leaned forward and squinted at the screen. The image was hazy and distorted from the rain and fog on the lens, but I could just barely make out movement near the front entrance. It looked like someone standing outside the door. I grabbed my flashlight and headed downstairs. My plan was simple. Check if someone actually needed help or if it was just rain triggering the sensor. When I opened the front door and looked outside, there was no one there. Just rain pouring down. Empty sidewalks, no footprints, no movement. I reset the alarm and locked the door again, assuming whoever it was had either walked away or never existed in the first place. Maybe the sensor picked up blowing debris or shifting shadows. Still, it felt strange. I went back upstairs. 5 minutes later, I heard a phone ringing. Not the security phone on my desk. This sound came from somewhere below me, deeper in the building. I frowned and stood up, following the ringing down the stairs. By the time I reached the floor, the call had already stopped. A few minutes passed. Then the phone rang again. I followed the sound into one of the office rooms. Rows of desks lined up in the darkness, overhead lights turned off, illuminated only by a single glowing phone screen sitting on one of the desks. The caller ID read, "Unknown caller." That alone made my skin crawl. Why would a random desk phone be ringing in the middle of the night? Why not the main reception line? How would anyone even know the extension number of this specific phone? I debated answering it, curiosity pulling at me hard, but I knew it wasn't my place to mess with office equipment. If management found out, I could get written up or worse. So I left it alone. The problem was, the phone kept ringing. For the next hour, I could hear it echoing faintly through the building while I sat in the security office. Ring, silence, ring again, over and over. It felt like the building itself was breathing around me. At 1 a.m., I did another walkthrough. Everything looked normal, doors locked, lights off, no signs of forced entry. I finished in about 10 minutes and headed back toward the security room. That's when I heard it. A loud thump echoed through the stairwell. Not a creak, not settling noises. A solid, heavy impact. My heart jumped into my throat. I checked the camera system, nothing obvious, no alerts, no movement. So I ran downstairs to recheck the doors. When I reached the front entrance, my stomach dropped. The alarm panel was blinking green. Pause mode. I never use pause mode. I only activate or deactivate. Never pause. Someone had disengaged that door manually. My pulse started hammering. I pushed the door open and looked outside. Still nothing. Just rain and darkness. I relocked the door, but the unease wouldn't leave. Something was wrong in the building. Deeply wrong. I hurried back up the stairwell toward the security office, hoping the system logs might tell me what happened. That's when I noticed it. The third-floor hallway door was open, the same floor where the phone had been ringing earlier. My instincts screamed at me to slow down. I stepped carefully toward the doorway, listening. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. The hallway was dark and silent. And then, everything went black. The blackout lasted less than a second, but it felt like falling into a void. One moment I was standing on the stairwell, staring into the dark hallway. The next, my vision exploded into white static. My ears rang violently, and my body lost all sense of balance. I knew instantly what had happened. I'd been hit in the back of the head. My legs buckled beneath me as my consciousness fought to stay upright. I stumbled backward down the steps, barely catching myself on the railing before slipping another step. Pain radiated through my skull like electricity, and the world tilted sideways. Through the blur in my vision, I saw a figure standing in the doorway above me, just a silhouette, tall, still, watching. Adrenaline snapped me into motion. I turned and half ran, half fell down the remaining stairs, gripping the railing as my boots slipped on the wet concrete. My ears rang so loudly I could barely hear my own breathing. I burst out of the building into the pouring rain. Cold water soaked through my clothes instantly, but I didn't care. I sprinted toward my car, ducked behind it, and pulled the work phone off my belt with shaking hands. I dialed 911. My voice sounded distant and slurred to my own ears as I tried to explain what had happened. I told them someone was inside the building, that I'd been attacked, that I didn't know if the person was still there. I stayed crouched behind my car in the rain, heart hammering, every shadow making me flinch. I couldn't tell how much time passed. Minutes felt stretched into something unreal. Eventually, flashing lights cut through the darkness. The police arrived and searched the entire building. They didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. No obvious damage. No stolen property reported. Whoever had been inside was already gone. I was taken to the hospital and diagnosed with a pretty severe concussion. Luckily, no skull fracture, no internal bleeding, just pain, dizziness, and strict instructions to rest. But what bothered me wasn't the injury. It was the precision of what happened. The person chose a night when heavy rain fogged the camera lenses, making the outdoor cameras nearly blind. They triggered motion at the front door, almost like a test, to see how I'd respond. They somehow knew the exact extension number of a random office phone and used it to lure me into the building. They knew how to disengage the alarm system properly, even using a setting I rarely touched. They waited in the stairwell, in darkness, for the perfect moment. That wasn't random. That was planned. Whoever it was understood the building, the security layout, the weaknesses, the timing, and they hit me hard enough that I couldn't even give the police a real description. Just a blurry outline burned into my memory. Months have passed since that night. I'm still working there, mostly because bills don't wait and jobs aren't easy to replace. But the company hasn't told me anything. No updates, no explanations, no confirmation of what the intruder wanted or whether anything was taken. Nothing. Every night I walk those same halls, I think about how close I came to something worse. How easily that person controlled the situation. How helpless I actually was inside a building that was supposed to be secure. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. And that's the part that keeps me awake. Because whoever planned that night never made a mistake. Story 3. I learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't when a stranger knocks on your door. It's when you realize the person you were waiting for never made it inside. A few months ago, my buddy Thomas was hanging out at my place for the evening. Neither of us had work the next day, so we were just relaxing, drinking a few beers, talking about nothing important. Originally, Thomas wasn't planning on staying late, but by the time it hit around 10, I offered to let him crash on my couch. That was pretty normal for us. He still lived with his parents, so staying at my place gave him a bit of freedom and space. We even started making plans for the next morning. Breakfast, errands, maybe catching a movie. It turned into one of those nights where tomorrow already felt mapped out. The only problem was, Thomas hadn't brought any extra clothes or toiletries. And before he drank too much, he decided to run back to his place real quick to grab a few things. That way he could come back, drink more, and still be set for the next day. His house was only about 5 minutes away, so I stayed behind, scrolling on my phone and finishing my beer. I almost went out to sit on the porch, but that's when I realized how bad the storm had gotten. Rain was pounding against the windows, wind rattling the siding, thunder rumbling somewhere in the distance. I went back inside and waited on the couch instead. I wasn't really watching the time. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes passed before I finally heard a knock at the front door. I got up without thinking, expecting Thomas. I opened the door casually and nearly dropped the glass in my hand. It wasn't Thomas. A man stood on my porch, soaked head to toe, dressed almost entirely in black. Rainwater dripped from his clothes and hair onto the concrete. His face looked exhausted, hollow, like he'd been outside in that storm for a long time. If I hadn't been expecting my friend, there's no way I would have opened the door for this guy. Before I could even speak, the man casually placed one foot inside my doorway and leaned forward slightly, peering into my house. Every instinct in my body screamed wrong. I quickly reached for the door and said I was sorry, that I thought he was someone else. He didn't move his foot. He just smiled. I tried closing the door again, gently at first, then a little firmer. His foot stayed planted in the doorway, blocking it completely. We stood there in silence for several uncomfortable seconds. He didn't say a word. I couldn't think of anything to say either. Then finally, he stepped back, still smiling. I shut the door immediately and locked it. My heart was racing, but part of me brushed it off as weird coincidence. Maybe I'd had a few too many beers. I even texted Thomas jokingly to watch out for the creepy guy lurking outside my door. At the time, it almost felt funny, until Thomas never came inside. I waited longer than it should have taken him to get back. At first, I blamed the storm. Maybe traffic slowed him down. Maybe he stopped for gas. But after a while, something started to feel off. I walked over to the window and looked outside. Thomas's car was parked along the curb. Engine off, lights off. But Thomas wasn't anywhere in sight. Confused, I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, letting the rain soak into my shirt. I scanned the street, expecting to see him walking up the driveway or fumbling with his phone. Nothing. I called his name, but the wind swallowed my voice. I pulled out my phone and called him. Immediately, his phone lit up inside the car. The screen glow made it painfully obvious. He wasn't inside. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I walked down the driveway into the rain, scanning the shadows, calling his name again even though I knew he couldn't hear me. The storm soaked me within seconds. That's when I remembered the man at my door. The smile, the foot in the doorway, the way he'd been standing there in the storm. Panic hit me all at once. I ran back inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. As I kicked off my wet shoes, something else caught my attention. The hallway lights were off. All of them. I was almost certain I'd left at least one light on. The house felt wrong. Unnaturally dark, unnaturally quiet, compared to the chaos of the storm outside. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly walked toward the hallway. At the far end, pressed against the wall, I saw a shape. A person. Standing perfectly still, blending into the darkness. For a second, my brain tried to deny it, tried to turn it into a shadow or a trick of light. Then the figure moved. He stepped toward me with confidence. One arm raised, something dark in his hand. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. Every ounce of adrenaline exploded through my body as I bolted for the front door and threw myself outside into the rain. My shoes nearly slipped on the wet steps as I sprinted away from my house, not even caring where I was going. I hid on the porch of a random house down the street and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. From where I was hiding, I could still see my house through the curtain of rain. A few minutes later, police cars pulled up. I watched as two officers approached the front door cautiously, then suddenly raised their guns and rushed inside. They later told me they saw the suspect standing in the hallway. The man ran out the back door and jumped the fence before they could catch him. The storm swallowed him completely. But the worst part came moments later. They found Thomas. He was locked inside a car parked down the road, tied up but alive. The man had ambushed Thomas at gunpoint when he pulled up to my house. He forced him into the car, drove him down the street, locked him inside, then came back to my house to try the same thing with me. Which meant, when I saw the figure in my hallway raising his arm, he was pointing a gun at me. If the lighting had been better, if I'd recognized what he was holding, I might have frozen instead of running, and I probably wouldn't be here. The car the man used had been reported stolen earlier that night. He disappeared without a trace in the storm. No name, no face, no motive. Just the knowledge that if I'd hesitated for even a second longer, both Thomas and I might never have made it out alive. Story 4. I didn't understand why my dog refused to come inside. It was late, freezing, and he'd been scratching at the back door for 10 minutes like he needed to get in. But the moment I opened it, he stopped, hair raised, body low, staring past me into the kitchen like something was standing there. Then he backed away, not like he was scared of a loud noise or a stranger, more like he'd recognized something he wasn't supposed to see. And that was the first time I wondered if I was the only one living in my house. I moved into the place in early fall, right after a rough breakup. It was a small rental just outside town, not isolated. There were neighbors. But the street was quiet, the kind where people close their curtains early and don't ask questions. The house looked normal enough. Old hardwood floors, a finished basement, a backyard with a shed. Nothing haunted. Nothing dramatic, just cheap, which was exactly what I needed. The first week, everything was fine. I unpacked, set up my TV, and got into routines: work, dinner, sleep. I adopted a rescue dog on impulse, an anxious shepherd mix I named Milo. He was clingy, but in a way that made the empty house feel less empty. Then small things started happening. Not obvious stuff, not ghost movie stuff. Just the kind of details you could blame on stress. A kitchen drawer I knew I'd shut, left open an inch. A different mug on the drying rack than the one I remembered using. A bathroom cabinet door hanging slightly crooked, like someone had leaned on it. I told myself it was nothing. Moving makes you messy. Your brain loses track. But Milo noticed. At night, he'd sit in the hallway and stare at the basement door. Not barking, just staring with his ears forward, like he was listening to something too faint for me to hear. Sometimes he'd whine softly and back away, tail tucked, and curl up against my legs on the couch as if he wanted me to understand. Don't go down there. I laughed it off. I even went into the basement on purpose once, flicked on every light, walked the whole thing with a broom in my hands like that would somehow make me brave. It was empty. Concrete floor, old shelves, a laundry area with a utility sink, a back corner with exposed beams. The air smelled like dust and cold cement. Nothing moved, nothing hid. But on my way back up the stairs, I felt something that made my skin tighten. Like I was leaving too fast, like someone was behind me, watching my back as I climbed. I slammed the basement door without meaning to. That night, I had a dream about footsteps in the basement, slow and patient, circling the base of the stairs. When I woke up, Milo was standing in the hallway, rigid, staring at the basement door again. A few days later, I came home from work and found the back door unlocked. I stood there with my keys in my hand, staring at the deadbolt. It wasn't forced, nothing was broken, it was just unlocked. My first thought was obvious. I forgot. But I was the kind of person who checked locks twice. I always had been. My dad drilled it into me. If you want to sleep well, he used to say, you make sure your doors are shut. I walked inside carefully and called Milo's name. He ran from the living room to me, excited like always, then stopped mid-step and looked past me into the kitchen. That same stiff posture, that same stare. Then he retreated, slow and careful, like he didn't want to turn his back on whatever he thought was there. I turned. Nothing. My kitchen was dim, late afternoon light through blinds, a chair pushed in under the table, sink empty, counter clear. And yet the feeling hit me immediately. Not fear exactly, more like someone had just left the room. like the air had been disturbed. I checked every room with my phone in my hand, ready to call someone. I opened closets, looked behind shower curtains, checked the basement again. Empty, quiet. No sign of a break-in, no missing electronics, no footprints, no broken window. So again, I did what you do when reality doesn't match your fear. I blamed myself. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I set the house alarm. I didn't even like having it on because Milo sometimes triggered the sensors, but I turned it on anyway. Just for tonight, I told myself. At 2:13 a.m., the alarm went off. Not the loud siren, just the system alert. A chime, a vibration on my phone. Back door, opened. I sat straight up in bed, heart pounding so hard it felt like someone was pressing on my chest. Milo didn't bark. He didn't growl. He hid. I saw him shove himself into the corner by my dresser, trembling so hard his collar tags clicked. I grabbed my phone, called 911 and whispered my address with my breath shaking. The dispatcher told me to stay in my room, lock the door, and wait. I didn't have a lock on my bedroom door, so I pushed my dresser in front of it. I stayed there in the dark, holding my phone like it was a weapon, listening for footsteps, and I heard them. Not upstairs, downstairs, soft and careful, like bare feet on hardwood. A pause, a faint squeak that sounded exactly like my kitchen drawer. Milo started whining silently, mouth closed, sound pressed into his throat. Then, so quiet I almost didn't believe it, someone spoke, not shouting, not calling, just a voice, low and controlled, like they were testing the sound of the house. "I know you're home." I froze. My mouth went dry so fast my tongue stuck to my teeth. The dispatcher was still on the line, asking me questions, but I couldn't answer. My brain went blank except for one thought. How did he know? Then the footsteps moved again, closer to the stairs. I listened to each one with my whole body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to do anything except stay perfectly still. But the footsteps stopped, and the house went quiet. So quiet, I could hear Milo's breathing. So quiet, I could hear my heartbeat like a drum in my ears. Then I heard something else, a soft scrape, like a chair shifting across the kitchen floor, and then a sound that made my stomach drop. My back door deadbolt turning, from the inside. The police arrived fast, faster than I expected. Red and blue light bled through my blinds, turning my room into a flickering nightmare. I didn't move until I heard voices outside, real voices, radios, a knock on my front door, another knock, a louder one. "Police, if you're inside, call out!" I choked out a response and shoved the dresser away with shaking hands. When I opened my bedroom door, the hallway felt wrong. Colder, somehow, like it had been holding its breath. 2 officers swept the house. They checked closets, the basement, the shed. They opened every door and corner and found nothing. The back door was locked. The alarm log showed it had opened at 2:13 a.m. and closed again at 2:14, 1 minute. The officer asked me if I had roommates. No. Any visitors? No. Any history of sleepwalking? No. He looked skeptical but professional. He said it could have been a malfunction. Could have been wind pressure. Could have been the sensor. But I knew what I heard. I knew someone spoke. I knew my dog hid like he'd been trained by instinct. Before they left, one of the officers gave me advice I didn't want to hear. "Get cameras," he said, "and change your locks." That morning I did both. I bought 2 indoor cameras and 1 outdoor. I installed one in the living room facing the hallway, one in the kitchen facing the back door, and one outside under the porch light. I also asked the landlord to change the locks. He sighed like it was a hassle, but he agreed. "Old place," he said. "Sometimes previous tenants keep a spare. Happens." That should have made me feel better. It did the opposite. For a week after that, nothing happened. No alerts, no missing things, no voices. Milo relaxed a little. He still stared at the basement sometimes, but not as long. I started to feel embarrassed about how panicked I'd been. I told myself the alarm triggered. I freaked out, and my brain filled in the rest. Then the kitchen camera picked up motion at 3:07 a.m. on a Tuesday. I watched the clip in my bed with both hands tight around my phone. At first, it showed nothing. A dark kitchen, moonlight through blinds. The back door still, the edges of counters like black shapes. Then, barely visible, a shadow moved along the wall. Not a random flicker, not headlights. A human shape, low and careful, moving just outside the frame. The camera didn't catch a face. It caught pieces. A shoulder sliding past the doorway. A hand, gloved, resting on the edge of the counter, steadying weight like someone leaning in. Then it paused, like whoever it was stood perfectly still, listening. And then it did something that made my blood run cold. It reached up and turned the kitchen light switch. Click. The overhead light came on, and the kitchen was empty. No one, no body, no motion, just light. And then, after 3 seconds, the light turned off again. Click. The camera recorded another second of darkness. Then the clip ended. I watched it over and over, trying to understand how that was possible. If someone turned the switch, they had to be there. So why didn't the camera see them? Unless they knew exactly where the camera's blind spot was. Unless they were moving in a way that avoided the lens on purpose. Unless they'd been watching the house long enough to learn the angles. My stomach twisted. I opened the camera app and checked the living room feed. Milo was awake, sitting in the hallway, staring at the basement door. Again. The next day, I called my landlord. I asked him directly if anyone else had keys. He said no. I asked if he'd ever had complaints about break-ins or strange tenants. He laughed and said, "No, it's a quiet street." I asked him about the basement. "Anything weird down there?" I tried to sound casual, like I was asking about plumbing. He hesitated. Just a second too long. "Old house," he said. "Basement's been there forever. There's an access panel behind the shelving. Don't mess with it. It's for maintenance." "What kind of maintenance?" "Pipes, wiring, just old stuff." "Look, you're fine." He ended the call fast. That night, I went into the basement with a flashlight. Milo refused to follow me. I moved the shelving in the back corner, the one I'd never really looked behind because it was stacked with old paint cans left by previous tenants. And there it was. A rectangular panel in the wall. Not a door. A panel. Painted the same color as the concrete, but with faint scratches around the edges, like it had been opened before. Recently. I pressed my fingers against it. It didn't feel sealed. It felt loose. I didn't open it. I told myself I'd call someone. I told myself I'd do it with daylight and backup. I walked back upstairs and locked the basement door. Then I moved a chair in front of it, like that would stop anything. At 1:42 a.m., Milo started growling. It wasn't loud. It was low and steady, like a warning signal. I woke up immediately. He was standing at the foot of my bed, staring at my bedroom door. Then I heard it. A soft tapping. Not on the window, not on the wall. On my bedroom door. 3 gentle taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I didn't move. Milo didn't bark. He backed up onto the bed and pressed against my legs, shaking. The taps came again, and then, right outside my door, something scraped along the floor. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging a fingernail along the wood. Then a whisper, so quiet it barely existed. "Luke." My name isn't Luke. My name isn't even close to Luke. And the way it said it wasn't like a mistake. It was like a test. Like whoever was in my hallway was trying names until they got the right reaction. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. The whisper came again. Different this time. My real name. Soft, calm, friendly. Like someone calling me down for dinner. I grabbed my phone and called 911 again with my hands shaking. But before the dispatcher even answered, the tapping stopped. The scraping stopped. The hallway went silent. And then, I heard the basement door open downstairs, a slow creak that I recognized instantly, followed by footsteps. Not coming up, going down, as if whoever had been outside my bedroom door had changed their mind, as if they'd decided to wait. The police arrived again. Again, they found nothing. Again, they offered explanations that sounded like they were trying to convince themselves more than me. Old house, settling wood, drafts. I didn't argue, because I didn't want them to think I was imagining this. I wanted evidence, so I told them about the panel. That got their attention. 2 officers went into the basement with me behind them, Milo refusing to even step onto the first stair. They moved the shelving. They examined the panel. One officer ran his fingers along the scratches. "This has been opened," he said. My stomach flipped. He used a tool to pry it loose. The panel came away with a soft pop, like breaking suction. Behind it was darkness, not just a hollow in the wall, a space, a narrow crawl space, unfinished, lined with old wooden beams and a dirt floor. It smelled like damp earth and something else. Stale sweat, maybe. A human smell trapped in a place that hadn't been aired out. The officer shined his flashlight inside, and then he froze. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way, like his brain had just decided what he was looking at didn't make sense. Inside the crawl space, there were signs of someone living there, a flattened area of dirt like a bed, an empty water bottle, food wrappers, a small flashlight, and, most disturbing, a folded blanket. My blanket. I recognized it instantly. It was the one I kept on my couch. I felt my legs go weak. One officer told me to go upstairs. His voice wasn't panicked, but it wasn't calm either. Upstairs, I sat at my kitchen table holding Milo's collar. My hands were numb. My mouth tasted like metal. Downstairs, I heard muffled radio chatter, footsteps, a sudden sharp command. "Show your hands!" Silence. Then something that sounded like movement, scrambling in a tight space. A thud, another voice shouting. Then more silence. After a long minute, an officer came upstairs and looked at me. "We didn't get him," he said. My stomach dropped. "He was there," the officer continued. "But there's another access on the far side. It runs under the yard. He got away." "How long?" My voice broke. "How long was he in there?" The officer didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. They searched the neighborhood. They brought dogs. They found footprints in the wet dirt behind my shed leading into the trees. Then the rain washed everything away. I moved out 2 days later. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't clean. I didn't care about the deposit. I stayed with a friend and slept with lights on for weeks. Milo didn't leave my side. Every time someone knocked on the door, he growled. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wake up and swear. I hear 3 gentle taps. Pause. 3 taps again. And the worst part isn't thinking about what he wanted. The worst part is knowing how comfortable he was, how patient, how familiar. He didn't break in through a window. He didn't force a lock. He was already inside, learning my routines, learning my habits, learning my name. And if my dog hadn't refused to come through that back door that first night, I don't know when I would have realized the house wasn't empty, or if I ever would have realized it at all.